Welcome to the Dark Nook Monster Shop. I make monsters. So I got this set of test tubes from Michael's in the discount bin for about $5. I was never really sure what I wanted to do with it. I just decided to make some random little wormy critters and stuff them in the test tubes. I start by making a guide out of cardboard. I cut a toilet paper tube and wrap the cardboard around one of the test tubes and then wrap that in duct tape. I'll use this, once I trim it down, to make sure that my wormy guys will fit in the test tubes. Now this wormy guy on a stick is one that I've made from just collecting scrap latex over the last few projects, and I've got plans for him. I use some of the foam clay to start rolling out my first worm. I kind of shape it out until I think it looks passably organic and worm-like. Then, while the clay is still soft, I start sticking glass cabochon eyes into it. Next, I use texture stamps and roll the wormy guy between them to really texture him up. Then I clean up some of the details and drop him inside his tube to dry. Then I start on the next one. It's the same process. I roll him out, texture him, but I decide to give this one a random little tuft of hair. Just because I had some hair sitting on my desk. I was like, alright, I'll just use that. Then I add his eye. I refine some details, and it's into his tube to dry. Next, I add a little more latex to the mess of latex on a stick. I want this one to be busting out of his tube, so he doesn't really have to fit. I thought about breaking the tube, but figured, I'd just make him pushing his way out of the top, maybe holding the cork as he was doing so. Once the other worms have dried a bit, I go back and carve in some more wrinkles and details. I add a mouth, and while I'm at it, how about a few more eyes? It's at this point I start to get the basic idea of what I'm going to go for. Weird worms that look weird and mutated, except for one, who's going to have kind of a normal face, like he's the only one that turned out right. When the latex is dry, I add some more latex scraps to the body to make some more tentacles. Then I pull the latex off the stick in a very stretchy and satisfying experience and set him aside. And it's on to the next worm, which I roll out with the texture stamps. I decide to give this one some pretty regular features. For a test tube worm anyway. I carve out the mouth and two eyes. They're even the same size and right next to each other. I use tweezers to position the eyes so they line up and they don't look too cross-eyed. Then I roll on some texture and build up the nose and brow. Then some more texture rolling. By the way, if you'd like to see a video on how I made the latex texture rollers, please let me know in the comments. I give him some teeth too for a wicked little smile. Then I poke a few holes that I'll use to add more tentacles later. For this last wormy guy, I just went nuts and added a bunch of eyes and tentacles from my collection of already made foam clay parts. And once it was packed with eyes and tentacles, it got the same treatment as the rest. Texture, details, and wrinkles. Then I carved in a bunch of mouths, one for each eye, and set him aside to dry. Next, it's tentacle time. I made a bunch of tentacles using the latex texture roller, and then add them to the worms. I add a little more texture to them with the texture roller and shape them into the shape that I want. Then I use a little bit of water to blend them into the rest of the clay. Then I repeat the process for each worm. Now it's time for paint. I start with the wooden stand for the test tubes. It's way too clean and nice. So I paint it brown and then I slather it with a green wash to make it look used and gross and dirty. When that's painted, I move on to the worms. First, I cover their glass eyes with latex to keep the paint off of them, and then I base them all out in green. When that's dried, they get a black wash. Then, I put the worms on a stick so I can zenithal paint them. Purple on the bottom and yellow on the top. This shading technique is quick and easy and looks really good. When the paint is dry, I remove the latex covering the eyes. For the last two worms that didn't get glass eyes, I'm going to paint the eyes. I also paint the teeth on the smiley worm. I paint in a few more details and finish them off by coating the painted eyes with UV resin. And as a final touch, I smear a little green paint and UV resin in the bottoms of the test tubes. Cure them with UV light. And once that's done, I smush the worms down into their tubes. I repeat this process for each worm. Then I realized all the corks were way too clean and dirtied them up with some green paint. And finally, I glue the cork to the tentacles of the escaping worm. And with that, test tube worms are done. On to the beauty shots. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Please hit like and subscribe to the Monster Shop for more creepy creatures and crafty creations.